All right. Randy and I are looking forward to sitting down with John Murphy today, CEO of JKMurphy Advisors. This is going to be a really interesting and insightful talk. John, I know you go by Murph, so I'm going to call you Murph moving forward. So everybody knows what I'm talking about. But you specialize. You do really. To boil it down into a nutshell, and I think what our listeners are going to really enjoy today is you get companies ready to sell with the idea, should we sell today? Should we sell tomorrow? And what you were advising them, I'm assuming in February, is different than what you're advising today with the world, as we're all kind of sitting here on August 12th during COVID. So welcome to the show. Randy and I love talking to all the business people we do each week and focus on mindset. So let's start there for a second, right? So when it comes to companies thinking, hey, you know what? Should I sell now? Should I sell later? What should I do? Let's just kind of bring it down to the base. What's the mindset of how companies should be thinking right now with COVID in the, with it being front and center?
Sure. Good morning. Thanks for having me, John and Randy. Delighted to be here.
Yeah.
COVID is, throwing everybody for a loop. Even the best business models, except Amazon, of course, have had to readjust themselves a little bit. And that's no different for our clients and companies that we talk to. Right now, we're advising companies to survive, do what you can to survive, which is typically prioritizing spending and grabbing as much liquidity as you can. So many people did the PPP and the other loans that are available through the SBA. And then prioritizing spending and cutting all non-essential spending, and then transition and thrive. And the one thing that I'm seeing right now as part of the transition phase is, what's our normalized revenue? Most of these companies, particularly the ones we deal with, which are anywhere from a few million to 100 million, sort of the true kind of full gamut of the middle market, the PPP addressed the cost side of their business, but nobody knows when their revenue is going to come back. And we've got prospects and clients that are 60% of their pre-COVID revenue, 80%, a few at 100%. But when you're at 60% of your pre-COVID revenue, you have to decide what kind of infrastructure you need, and it generally isn't the same infrastructure that you had when you were at 100%. So companies are trying to, and I think right now is a critical time for the economy, because a lot of these companies are just realizing where their normalized revenue is going to kind of come in at, and how they need to adjust their business to do that. And then in terms of transition, think of all the restaurants that are transitioning to both takeout and outdoor seating, which generally, a lot of restaurants, takeout wasn't a part of their business, and most outdoor seating wasn't part of their business, particularly those back east where, towards the Midwest, where you and I grew up, and out here in California, we're blessed with, you can sort of sit outside 12 months of the year. So transitioning in the COVID world is the key. Is how do these business models have to adjust and change? And then, is there a way to thrive? Is there a new channel that you can reach out to that'll take you to paths that you hadn't been before? But the key part is surviving, and that's where a lot of people are right now.
Yeah. So Murph, with respect to, pre-COVID versus post-COVID, one thing I learned a long time ago from one of my favorite mentors was, it takes money to spend money, right? Or, to put it differently, if you want to make money, you have to spend money, whether you have it or not. Ultimately, you have to invest in yourself, and you generally win. So what is the psyche of the business owners that you're dealing with now, post-COVID, in terms of their ability to let go, and not necessarily let go of financially and continue doing what they were doing before in hopes of bringing in the top line revenue? Are you finding it challenging in terms of getting them to do it, or are they their own worst enemies?
No, I think that the COVID has kind of laid everybody equally, and it's everybody's got to adapt, and if there's no better way to change than when you're forced to. So I think a lot of people are making decisions that they never thought that they would, and they're doing things that they might not have thought of they would. So I'm finding that the COVID is really pushing people to make changes when they otherwise might not have, because in some cases it's just survival. think of all the companies that have gone down just in the last 6 months, and even before COVID. All the retailers, Hertz rental car, CPK, what's the Sur La Table? I mean, all these companies that, like, I mean, I not so much Hertz, but the other ones, these companies are now gone, or they're going to be in, different shapes of themselves.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how the COVID has laid everybody down to the ground, and it's everybody's in the same boat. They've got to make changes to survive, really.
I mean, you look at even they just announced Dunkin' Donuts, I think, is closing roughly 800, Starbucks 400. I mean, there's so many. I want to go back to something you said, Murph, about making a decision, because you and I do similar things in different ways. But one of the things I find as I coach people around the country is people have had such a difficult time. Leaders, very smart people, up and down any part of the business, making a decision. And when COVID hit, they had to figure out, wow, I got to make decisions, and I got to make decisions fast.
Right.
So that's my audience during the podcast.
Does that mean the dog likes it or doesn't like it? I'm not sure.
Right. And so when it comes to, talk a little bit about what you're seeing as far as not the fact that they're making the decision, but I want to rewind that a little bit on what formula are they using now to make a decision? Is it a 30-day decision? Is it a 60-day decision? Because when you're talking about transitioning and thriving, like, I just want to kind of get into the mindset of the formula of how people are making decisions, because I think that'll help a lot of people.
Well, there's something called a 13-week cash flow, which a lot of companies in the stress that are in stressful situations or the restructuring world, everybody uses the 13. I don't know where 13-week came from, but everybody uses a 13-week cash flow, and it's not an income statement. It's literally cash in and cash out. Mm-hmm. So you can try to predict over the next 3 months what your cash needs are going to be. So that's the first thing that we recommend. And a lot of companies do that already, where they just use that as a planning tool. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the what do I need to do today to head off this negative shortfall I see 2 months from now, or a month and a half from now, whatever it is, whatever the numbers are showing you. So that gives you a pretty good indication. And then it's carrying out whatever you need to and making decisions you need to survive. I mean, my sense is the PPP worked pretty well. I mean, it was 9 million people trying to get into the same entry point at one time. So it was a really kind of hard way to get in. But once it was in, I mean, it really has helped a lot of companies that I'm aware of, from the flower shop down the street to companies that we deal with. So I think that's really helped. But now the key is, how do you survive knowing that your revenue is not going to be the same place that it was? And I think a 13-week cash flow is a really key component in trying to figure out where you stand.
Yeah.
But with every 13-week cash flow statement or any report that can be run by people in your industry or bankers, it comes down to people. And ultimately, PPP works so well, but so did government stimulus and all the other economic programs designed to get the economy back up. But unfortunately, with many of my entrepreneurial clients, the employee doesn't want to come back to work, because they're making more money sitting on the sidelines than they are, going back to work. So this is sort of the push and pull. And I think in terms of mindset, it really causes a struggle for the employer who says, should I let them go, or do I continue with this? Because I'm trying to drive top line revenue, and I don't know how to do it unless you have the people.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely true. Now, some of that, unfortunately, went away on July 31st, and they're still kind of figuring out how to replace that. And I hope they do in some way, because I think it's been helping a lot of people. There's kind of two schools of thought. One is that you go deeper than you think you need because you don't know what's really out there. And the other school of thought is you don't, because when it comes back, and when it comes back closer to normalized revenue, you're going to want the key people, especially if you're in a skilled set business where you have to, you have skilled labor. You're going to want those people there when that happens. So you have to figure out what's the where's the gray line in the middle there? What makes the most sense for your business? And what I've heard business owners say to me, from friends to clients, some of them have been saying things like, I'm willing to lose this amount of money in the first year, in the next 12 months, to support my business and to support the foundation for being able to react when the business does come back. Because it will come back at some point. The question is when. It may not come back exactly in the same way or in exactly the same amount, but it will come back. And what I've urged people to do is kind of think about it that way, is how much are you willing to go into the red to support your business with a foundation that you're going to be ready for the future?
Yeah.
And that's the way I've approached. I've got a client that has I'll call it a startup business, and it's not making money, and he's funding it all. And I told him, you need to put parameters around how much money you're willing to invest before you see the milestone and results that you want, because that's the way that you'd be if you were raising capital from the VC or the angel or the seed community world. They would be judging you on these milestones and rewarding you with more capital or not as you make these milestones. You should do that same type of thing with yourself, because otherwise you might end up in a case where you've put a lot of money in and you haven't gotten to the point that you really wanted. So what I've noticed in terms of mindset is that owners are thinking about, what's the maximum amount of money that I'm willing to quote unquote lose to keep the business where I want it to be for the future.
Yeah, so it sounds like the scaling of a company is obviously very different today than it was pre-COVID, because the scale in the company, I don't think there's an across-the-board metric anymore. It's going to be probably slower, would you say, than it was pre-pandemic?
Probably, yeah. I mean, the other thing that I do is I'm an active angel investor, and so I've been fairly active in the last 3-4 months, and there's a few businesses that SaaS businesses and other businesses. One in particular, an IT business that I'm investing in that are benefiting from COVID. But to your point, most other businesses, particularly in a consumer-related business, I think are slower to scale up. Yeah. This is, there's no playbook for this. I mean, this is like, who knew that the one assumption that we make, that we could go any place, anywhere, anytime, as long as it wasn't breaking a law and we had the money to do whatever it was, that we could do it. And who knew that was going to be not the case anymore?
Yeah.
It's like, holy smokes.
Well put.
Really well put. What types of deals today are the angel investors and people who are looking to invest in companies? Where's the capital going, right? What type of businesses are they looking at and saying, you know what, as we forecast out, as we project, not only 13 weeks, but over the next 12 or, really the next decade, as we're in this kind of decade of adapting and changing aggressively, what types of companies are even, what types of companies are they looking for?
Well, SaaS businesses, of course, software as a service, particularly where, you're solving a big problem for few people or a little problem for a lot of people. Those are businesses where you can see a lot of opportunity. I kind of see two worlds. So the consulting world that we live in are more established companies, and the angel world are more startup companies. In the established world, there's less healthy, what I'll call a healthy M&A going on. I see there's more debt deals for companies that are trying to survive and get liquidity, like we talked about earlier in survival, and some minority equity. But if you're an owner of a business that has a lot of options and is doing okay, or was doing really good before COVID and maybe is taking a step back with COVID, you probably don't want to sell right now. You probably want to wait to sell after COVID, after you get back to more pre-COVID levels. So you're raising the capital you need today in whatever way you need it to get there. In the startup world, startup companies need capital like crazy because they're not, by definition, generally not making money. So the ones that are making money, so that they don't need to be dependent on capital raises, those are very popular right now. And SaaS businesses are very popular right now. The other thing is that there's lots of I know there's lots of time and probably lots of money being spent on ideas that revolve around COVID. Maybe not the healthcare side, but the way that these business models are changing. So there's lots of innovation that's going to come out of this time where people are going to say, pre-COVID, this wasn't needed, but now it is needed because of this, this, and this. So there's that kind of business as well. So there's lots of opportunity, particularly in the angel world I see today for, because nobody owns a monopoly on great ideas, and everybody can, lots of entrepreneurship in this country, which I just love. I've decided that I'm not going to cure cancer in my lifetime. What I know is how to hang around entrepreneurs and help them in any way that I can. And so that's why I spend most of my days doing.
Yeah, and you talk about on your website, and most people in your industry will always talk about value enhancements and value adjustments and add backs and all these fancy financial terms that some people, unless they're doing it every day, simply don't understand. But you use the term value driver, which is something that really resonates with me. So, the value driver, obviously there are many different ways to drive value, but how do you, Murph, drive value in your relationships? How do you drive value in the business relationship? And what do you see coming out of what you put in? Like, in your experience, what are you seeing out there in terms of that value driver that's across the board that says, you know what, this person has it, and we're going to get to the finish line because of these value drivers?
So I've been hanging around the hoop with business owners my whole career, both as an investment banker and now this. And I'd say that I've seen more value created with hiring and keeping great people, because you can't do it all yourself. Conviction. I find that the more conviction you have about where you're going with your business, the more value you get for your company, or the more value you're going to get out of your business. Focus. If you're focused on 10 things, you probably should be focused on 5. I find that a lot of business owners spend too much money on growth. They try to fund lots of initiatives because they don't know which one's going to pay off. So rather than funding the best initiatives and figuring out how to come to the conclusion of what's a best initiative, they fund lots of initiatives. So my not so great example is, you plant lots of seeds in your background, grass seeds, but you can't nurture all those seeds because you've planted too many. So you end up with a garden that doesn't look very good. But if you plant 5 seeds and they're the best seeds, and you really have time to nurture and take them to their full potential, you're probably going to have a better garden. So those are the things: hiring and keeping great people, focus, and spending on the right growth initiatives, and conviction. Those are the things that I've seen create the most value in terms of the companies that I've either been associated with or been working for. So invested in.
Those are great things. They're solid things to remember from a fundamental standpoint. Kind of layer in innovation on that. One of the things that I have found, and I think Randy and I have talked about this on past shows, where companies were really behind real time. They weren't current with technology, and really COVID really fast forwarded everybody. And so what are you seeing when it comes to how they're adapting and utilizing technology to be more efficient and stay innovative, not continue to fall behind?
Well, that's probably the fourth thing, is ability to change. So you brought up a really good one. I think it's remarkable that in the first month of COVID, almost every business that I know went remote. I mean, think about that. That was an incredible, every IT person in the country was working 24 hours a day to make sure that all worked. I mean, and some companies had a better head start on it than others because they already had a remote workforce, perhaps. Excuse me. But that's incredible to me, is how fast the world went remote and how probably sticky that's going to be in the future. So that's the first one that jumps out at me, is just the ability to get that accomplished in such a short period of time, knowing that every day that you didn't get it accomplished, there was stuff falling through the cracks of whatever your business is going to be. And then now I think now that remote's there, making permanent changes, as we look at the transition, or stabilize, transition, and thrive, part of each of those is taking what you've done on a temporary basis in the previous phase and deciding whether it should be permanent or not. And, the bigger one right now is, making sure that your employees are safe, of course. And then remote, my sense is, just the walking around sense that I had is, remote used to be kind of like, okay, we'll do it as an employer. And now I think it's gone to, if you want to do it, let's do it, because it really makes sense. And and I hear people talk about that everybody's not as efficient. But in the case of Southern California, if you can tell somebody that they've got 2 hours of their day back, I think the cultural impact that you get from that, the cultural boost you get from that, outweighs any marginal less efficiency that you might get in terms of the not being able to keep track of people. Although, I talked to, the technology is available that you can keep track of people. So, I think that that remote is going to be a huge thing. And I think it might have big implications for the real estate market too, in terms of the office markets and how people work in the future. So that's probably the biggest one I see. And then, I have this, John, do you work with any CEO of any company who says their IT works well?
No.
Isn't it crazy?
A lot of IT people, and I don't mean this as a broad statement, but a lot of IT people, when you ask them, hey, can you do X? Their first response is always no, right? Yeah.
I think that it's the biggest question mark that I've ever seen in business is, why doesn't IT work better for the companies that I work with? I don't work with the IBMs and the, General Electrics and the Bank of Americas. I work with companies you've never heard of mostly. And they are, part of this economy and doing well, but it's like, IT is just one of those areas. And I have two really good friends in IT, and I kind of say it all the time, it's not their fault. It's the software just doesn't seem to connect with businesses in a way that makes them, nobody ever has their IT settled. And maybe part of that is the reason is just because it changes so much. You can't always have it settled. You have to be constantly changing. But, that's the one thing I hear most common from business owners is their IT just has never really worked exactly how they thought it would. And is, isn't it? I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but I just thought I'd ask you, because that's certainly been my experience.
Yeah, and that's why in some transactions, sales. Oh,
sorry. Go ahead, Randy.
No, I said, and that's why jokingly is some transactions when you're selling a business and they want reps and warranties and IT, everyone kind of looks at each other and says, "Well, I don't know." Call in the IT department, and then when they speak IT, nobody understands. So that's part of the problem.
Right.
Yeah,
I do have a question. Randy, do you have a question?
No, go ahead, John.
I have a question. So I want to talk about, before we close, timing to actually sell a company. Okay. A mentor told me a long time ago, better to be a year early than a day late, right? And in real estate, I was in real estate for a long time. They always say time kills deals, and nothing kills deals more than greed. And we all saw that in 2008, where people were holding out and deals were dying over, $1,000, and then the market fell apart. And so, when is the right timing to actually sell a company?
The best time is when you look good and the market looks good. So let's talk about each of those. You looking good, you're in a nice cycle. People, first of all, the people you deal with are professional buyers, so they've seen all the tricks in the world. And so our advice is always, let's put the straight story out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because they tend to believe the good. If you tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly, they tend to believe it, which they should, because you're not just telling them all good.
Right.
So, having a good ghost story, growth, margins, market share, management team, those are all kind of key components of how people value businesses. They also value it, in the case of strategic buyers or quasi-strategic buyers, they value it as how it would fit with whatever they might already have. That's called synergy, typically. And so our process is, how do we get those key variables on the best footing that we can before we go talk to them? What kind of growth can we engineer or re-engineer? What kind of margins? Oh, here's another little thing I back to kind of big picture item. I always find that business owners think that all revenue is created equal, and it's not. Some revenue is better than other depending upon the business. So like if you're an airline company, the last 5 seats of your airline or the last 50 seats of your airplane is the best revenue because you have no more cost associated with taking those. And every time the plane flies, you can never get that revenue back. So so figuring out what the best revenue for your business is and creating more of that and having a strong, deep management team. So those are part of what we look at in terms of, and how much conviction you have about where you're going. Again, that word, your word is unstuck. If I had to boil it down to one word, it'd be conviction. Is how much conviction do you have about where you're going? Because you just get that just sets the tone for a great process and a great outcome. And then the market being right, the private M&A market, there's lots of capital out there. There still is. Private equity groups, which you probably know about, strategic buyers. There's lots of cash in the economy. I've heard some talk of it's been hard for buyers to price risk today in the market, or at least in the early days of COVID. I think that there's more deals going on now than there were obviously in April and May. So that's kind of like, and then are you emotionally ready for it? Because it's an invasive process. It's not a sprint. It tends to be a little bit more like a marathon or an intermediate distance, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. So those are the things that we help our clients think about as they're thinking about does creating liquidity in this way or that way, meet the objectives that you have. And then the other thing we focus on is, if you're going to pull back, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Because sometimes that has to be thought about too. And Randy, you probably focus on that too when people are building estates and then they execute on the estates. It's like, what are you going to do next? So the personal side of things. But in all that discussion, it's really all about change. You're really talking about change, because you might change some of the way the business is run before you sell, and you're certainly going to be through a new process when you are selling. For many of our clients and many of the business owners out there, it's the first and the only time that they've done this. They may have, working with younger entrepreneurs, you tend to see repeats, so those are the things that we think about. How do you look? How good does the company look, and how good does the market look?
That's well said. And all too often, sometimes people are so quick to get to the finish line, they forget about all the planning that could have taken place before they get the big tax bill. So one thing I would say to anybody listening, engage with Murph or someone like Murph early and get with your estate planning, shameless estate planning attorneys early, and create a plan that can then, be handed off to the corporate team to get you to the finish line in a tax-efficient manner. It's so important.
We actually did a few webinars with a close friend of mine who's in the wealth management business about in April and May doing planning and gifting at the lower valuations, and then having us help to figure out how to get the valuation back up. The public markets come all the way back now. The S&P is just almost just within a little bit of its high in February, but there's still planning opportunities to do with you, Randy, on gifting using discounts, of course. And I think the private market's probably not quite where the public market was, has come back as fast. So there's still planning opportunities given where valuations are for private companies. So I think the message for me would be to get Randy involved so that you can take advantage of those opportunities where, and then just whenever you execute down the road, you've got that planning opportunity already taken care of.
Yeah. And I'm just going to pull out the theme that you guys are both talking about and just emphasize, if anyone needs, in more words, plan. I mean, it is, and I think one thing COVID taught us is we need our plan A, we need our plan B, we need our plan C, and we need our plan D, because we don't know what the future brings, and we don't know when it's going to drop. So I think that's great advice by both you guys. All right, Murph, you ready for the speed round?
Yeah. What's a speed round?
you got to wait and see. It's going to be fast, though, Murph. Get ready.
Oh, man. All right.
Favorite book and why?
Favorite book and why? Don't Eat Lunch Alone.
Great one.
Because I don't like to eat lunch alone.
All right, that's a good one. That's a good one.
East Coast or West Coast? Which is your favorite?
West Coast.
One piece of advice you'd give somebody graduating college today in a different world than they thought it was going to be in February.
Take some risk. Take risk now because you can always recover. You can recover from financial, relationship, career mistakes. When you're 50, when you're in your 50s and 60s, it's harder to take risk with your career, and now's the time to take it.
All right.
Well
Randy, any more?
Yeah, no, I just I'm taking this in, John. This is we don't get grace with this much presence at one time.
Yeah. But let me ask you guys a question. John, you and I talked a little bit. Why do you do what you do? What drives you?
Wow.
You know, what drives me is I love helping people get unstuck. I love helping people reach their potential. It's just part of my soul work. I love it. I love going in. I feel like I have a gift where I can hear and see things that other people can't, that are so obvious to me. And I can use, I love to listen and ask questions.
Yep.
And then help people, set a plan and then reverse engineer it. And to me, it's just, and then give them the tools and work with them strategically how to move forward. And it's just incredibly fulfilling. And I feel like I can be myself and just do what I do. And I'm in complete alignment when I do it. And I love it. I love it. And I didn't realize it. I knew at 18, my dad gave me a set of tape sets by Brian Tracy, The Psychology of Success. He said, listen to these tapes, you'll learn more from these people than you will college. I put it on my ears and I knew it was exactly what I wanted to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so I resonate with everything you said. I love what I do. I never really loved being a banker, but I love this because I feel like we're really helping. And the one thing, maybe you'll resonate with this, the way I think of everything you just said is everybody's in their own forest.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we go into companies, it's hard to see things. Sometimes it's hard to see things when you're in the forest, and it's easier to see things when you come in from the outside because you don't have to be held to the way companies talk. Every company has its own language, the way the culture works, the history and the precedent of a business that affects the culture. And when we're when we're brought in, it's because we want to make it better.
Right.
We're kind of assessing all these things, and the easiest example I can give you is what I worked for a guy about 10 years ago, and everybody in your company calls you Mr. And he said, no, I don't hear that. He said, yeah, I'll just call him Smith. I said, yeah, everybody calls you Mr. Smith. And I said, I've only heard that one time in my career, and that's when I did some work for J.B. Hunt Trucking Company, and everybody called Johnny B. Hunt Mr. Hunt because he was already at that point 75 or 80 years old, and as I recall, didn't go to college and maybe high school, and started this business from nothing. And the reverence of where he had gotten, everybody called, and the fact that he was a little older than everybody called him Mr. Hunt. And I said, I've never heard it. And besides, you're a young company, and everybody in your company is within about 5 years of you, and it's just as strange that they call you Mr. He said, I don't hear that.
Yeah.
And I said, so while we're on the subject, you also call everybody in your business staff. You call everybody staff. And this was a healthcare business, and he had worked for a big institution where he was part of the staff.
Yeah.
He had busted out and started his own business, and now he was management, because there used to be management and staff. Now he was management. And I said, if I work for you and I heard you call me staff, I'd be offended by that. I want to be part of the team. I want to be part of what's going on here. I want everybody to be. And so from that day forward, it was Mike and team. And to me, that's just like, everybody's in their own forest. And
everybody's in their own forest. And what I love about what you're talking about is one of the things I love about what I do is, and I've had my own companies in the past, I have my own company now, is in corporate America, you're always worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing and getting fired. There's always some element of that. And for myself, and I think for you and probably Randy too, we're never worried about getting fired because we're hired to be ourselves, to tap into all of the senses.
That's right.
And you know, we could talk about energy and frequency and vibration, but truth vibrates the highest. So people hire the three of us to come in and tell them the truth because they got too many people around them not telling them what they really need to know. And
I'm sorry, but I have to steal that. Truth vibrates the highest. I have to use that on my own sometime. But I will give you credit every time I say it. Okay.
Yeah. No, you don't have to give me credit.
You get the right frequency though.
I stole it from somebody else. You steal it from me. That's how the world. You know why? Because the way you'll say it will vibrate in your own way, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Randy, why did you? If you don't mind my asking, why do you do what you do?
Well, it was sort of predestined. When I was born, my father said, I'm going to name you Randall because a great plaque will be on the wall that will show you as being a lawyer. So it always stayed in my head. So I say guilt, but the reality is I truly love what I do and I love the people. And, you know, it's something that I look forward to. My wife says I'm crazy, but I truly love what I do. I love the people. I love the interaction. I love the education. And the number of people we see day in and day out, you're learning something every day. And then you can just impart that knowledge on the next person. Yeah. So I really enjoy it.
You guys are awesome. I feel the same way. So I'm delighted Paul introduced us, John.
Yeah, me too. You know, it's we may have to have you on as a I don't know what they call a tri-host occasionally.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that. He is unbelievable.
Yeah, you know, we'll have like a guest, and we'll just have we'll turn this into like The View. You know,
when we have the next barking dog, John can step out and you step in.
Yeah, I'll have Cooper and Ollie as part of the panel. All right.
Whatever you guys want, I'd love to. It's been great. Thank you.
All right, good. Murph, tell everybody who your ideal client is and how they can get a hold of you.
Sure. By the way, I have a business partner, which we haven't talked about, who's a process expert. He's an awesome guy, Jack Haney. He's a terrific person and a great partner, and I learn from him every day.
Jack Haney, wasn't that like the major workout guy, like who's like 95 and can do 100 push-ups? You know what I'm talking about?
Jack LaLanne.
Jack LaLanne.
Yeah, okay.
He also took boats with his bare teeth. And
you got the first name right, John.
Right.
So our client is typically established. Our consulting client established, private. It's private. It's either family owned, partner owned, or entrepreneur owned. Generally, institutional shareholders. Most of them don't have institutional shareholders, and they're anywhere from 5 million to 100 million in revenue. You know, generally speaking. And it's kind of one of 3 or 4 key assignments. Two or more shareholders can't agree on where to take the company. So we're brought in to help understand where the business is going and what's the right path for the business. And then does it have the right shareholders for the business? And generally where we've gotten brought in by that, it's been a difference in risk. Different shareholders want to take different risk at that stage in their life with their business and their personal. Generally, most of our clients have a fairly high proportion of their net worth tied up in the business as well, which is I'm sure common with both of you guys, especially Randy, because I see you shaking your head. Yes. So the second is that they've said to you or one of our great referral sources, hey, I want to sell in 2 or 3 years. What should I be doing now to plan for that? Third is the growth plan in his or her head just isn't working well, and they don't know why. And it's gone on long enough that they're willing to reach out and pay for it to, maybe solve the problem.
Right. And put it on paper.
Pardon me?
And put it on paper.
Put it on paper. Yeah. That's the thing that we talk about. It's not just the process we go through. It's not just what what's written on paper, but it's the process we go through. And we poke holes in everything that they hold dear about their business and try to make it better. And then the last one is the one I mentioned first off is, should I sell today or should I sell tomorrow? I got this big growth plan or this opportunity for growth that I'd like to do myself, or maybe I'll sell that along with the plan to the buyer, or do it myself. Should I run the risk? The big issues that we tend to weigh in on are strategy, growth, value, performance, operations, liquidity, and risk. How much risk do I want to take at this stage in my life? How much risk do I want to take with the business by putting leverage on it or not? How much risk do I want to take by expanding it, by making acquisition, or, how much risk do I want to take? So in succession, and those issues are all part of what we deal with every client. They're just in different weightings. We work with a couple of companies that never want to sell, so succession is much more forefront than some of the others are. And one thought I just leave with you, because I always find it fascinating, especially for the companies that don't want to sell. I always ask them, do you care about the value of your business? And regardless of the answer, my opinion is they should care about the value of their business, because if they're not, they're probably going to sub-optimize relative to companies that they compete with that do care about the value of their business, and therefore they may not make the decisions that they should in order to to support and strengthen the business long term. So it's kind of ironic that companies that have no interest in selling still need to care about the value of their business. So I find that to be the case.
I love it. How do they get a hold of you? Your website, phone number, email?
Yeah. JKMurphy at JKMurphyAdvisors.com. I just decided to make it easy. 213-705-0391. And JKMurphyAdvisors.com is our website.
All right.
So this has been awesome, you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been a ton of fun. I feel like I just got a PhD, Randy. And yeah.
I know that if Plan A doesn't work, we got 25 more letters in the alphabet. And I think John represents every one of them.
Yeah. I always said that if I ever wrote a book, which I never will, that I'd call it Plan B, because Plan A doesn't always seem to work out, and regardless of what you're talking about. And like you said earlier, you need to have plans. So.
I think the name of your book should maybe be Transition and Thrive.
You like that, huh?
Yeah, because you've talked about a lot, and I think a lot of times people don't know how to transition, and they don't know how to thrive. That's my 2 cents. But John, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I loved our conversation. I know we're talking again in a couple days, which I'm looking forward to. Randy, always fun with you. And
likewise.
And my dogs are.
I hear Cooper
cheering us on. Cheering us on.
That's your exit.
Cheering us on. News, right?
And, what'd you say?
I think that's good news, right? They're happy.
Yeah. They only bark for a good interview. They only bark for a good interview. Thank you, John. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. Bye-bye.